Everything about our everyday lives has to change. We are changed. We are changed. We are changed. We are changed. Freedom. I said freedom. Free your mind from mental, physical slavery. Since we are free, we are free. We are changed. We are changed. We are changed about truth. We are changed about love. We are changed about knowledge. And together, we can make a change.
Playing for change around the world for the freedom and justice.
Alright, we are Change TV, sitting here with Jim Chan of Eco Homestead in Hawaii. Aloha, Jim. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Michael. I'm glad you're here. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to do this interview. And you are a pretty impressive person, have an interesting history. I'll let you go into that, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. I think the easy way to chew on that is I've had sort of 3 lifetimes. One was in the American Army, where I arose to the rank of lieutenant colonel and did some pretty outrageous things, like create the first Earth Battalion, which the Army printed the manual called Evolutionary Tactics, and it kind of launched the whole Defense Department off into a more creative role, including the Paranormal Soldier, which produced the Men Who Stare at Goats movie, basically. And my second sort of lifetime was in the corporate world, where I asked senior corporate leaders embarrassing questions like, what is your higher purpose? And then I illustrated those on my large boards, and then when it came time to get them into action, I did my shamanic number, where I turned the lights down, turned the music up, and sometimes with a mask or not, gave them the energy of making their move into the targets they had already created. And now I'm kind of a social architect, and I have designed footprints for how we live here in Hawaii, and that's probably the subject of that I like to talk about most.
Right.
Because we are an endangered species here on an island, and the county can say all they want to, that they're ready and they have their telephones and whatnot, but they're just not very much behind them. And people are not actually jumping on the farm wagon, and they're not jumping on keeping a little food under the stairs. So it's worth saying one more time, get survivable, get sustainable, and step on those stones on your way to paradise, because they're all possible.
You mentioned the Men Who Stare at Goats. Can you go into that a little bit, and
Sure.
maybe your relationship with Albert Stubberbein, or General Stubberbein, I'm sorry?
Yeah, well, the think tank called Task Force Delta included some real wonderful guys in the Army, and Bert Stubberbein was one of them. And he happened to be the commander of the Intelligence Command then. So when we opened the door on this creativity, which was basically saying, how can we help our soldiers survive better on the battlefield, and at the same time reduce the collateral damage on the battlefield? It means saving lives. We had to get away from the heavy weapon thinking and get into paranormal thinking, and that's where Bert picked up on some of my ideas. He took the Earth Battalion manual and moved down the road. But about 5 years ago, a guy named John Ronson came here with a BBC film crew, and during that time, he was a gaffer. You know, he was just carrying stuff around. He wasn't even the interviewer, but he listened to enough things and got a copy of the manual, and later on wrote a book called Men Who Stare at Goats, which was very edgy, kind of yellow journalism about a half of which was somewhat true. But then another guy at the BBC, named Strawn, wrote an incredible screenplay which George Clooney saw and bought, not knowing what he had. He just paid for it. So he found a production company, and they sent me one day this copy of the script, and they said, "We want to make this movie, but if you don't release us from all liability, we're not going to make it." And I really pushed, because the movie as it was written could have been really embarrassing to a lot of really creative people who stretched their necks out a long way to be creative. And after some thought, though, I realized, you don't get any new information about the world out, because the web is wonderful, but it's a hairball. There's so much information of a trivial kind everywhere that if you want to break a hole in it, you have to have some downfield blocking. So I figured George Clooney, Jeff Bridges, that's pretty good downfield blocking. And so I signed the papers and released them to make the movie as they saw fit. But I did sign on as a technical advisor, and it was a good relationship. And people will see the movie for the second time and actually click on the featurette called The Real Men Who Stare at Ghosts. You'll find out exactly how much of the movie was true and how much of the movie was real or false or Hollywood.
So that's on the internet, The Real Men Who Stare at Ghosts?
It's on, you have to get the DVD.
Okay.
You get it on, if it's streaming, you won't get the feature or the featurette.
Right.
But if you do see the film, notice how very cleverly we say something very positive about what soldiers could do in the world. And then before people have time to burp or gulp or say, that doesn't sound right, then there's a comedy pratfall or something to distract them so that the medicine goes down. So there were 37 positive statements about what an army could do for the world in that movie, in the midst of all the chaos and fun. I consider that a success.
Looking back at all the programs you worked with in the military and stuff, which one do you think was the most impactful, that actually helped and created the most amount of change?
Well, that's a very pregnant question right now, because I'm just releasing the fact that after I retired from the military, I took the field manual, which basically was a compendium of human excellence, really. Very high ideals, planetary-oriented, service-oriented, etc. And I managed to get into the Soviet Union, masquerading as one of the telepathy team, citizens, diplomats, and give that to a Soviet guy I knew who could give it to the Soviet army. And that was just before Glasnost. I managed to sneak into China pretending I was a mountain climber and delivered a manual to the Chinese government, and I also went into Cuba somewhat under the wire and did that, got a manual to Fidel Castro. Now, the point of all that was to raise their army's sights about what service could mean at the planetary level, and to give them an inside idea about what the American Army was really like, not being driven around by corporations and other interests, but left up to their own devices where their humanity really was. And so that's really the most interesting. Writing the manual wasn't that hard. Going around and visiting human potential groups, that wasn't hard. What's hard standing in front of 1,000 field-grade officers and 110 generals and telling them this story? But I managed my way through that. As a result, have become quite a shamanic speaker over time. And I'm still, of course, trying to get that information to the world about what the armies of the world can really do. And I have personally trained 210 general officers from 11 nations in taking all their military resources as they have them, looking at the forest, looking at the water systems, looking at the coral reefs, and applying those resources directly. That's my dream. It's also using a resource that's already paid for. It's already fed. as trucks.
We'll briefly go into what we see as activists as the problem, and then we'll move on to what you are doing, which is the solution. You know, self-sustainability, living, being a little bit more eco, walking lighter on the earth. You know, not creating so much of an impact as human beings. Being able to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves. So the food, water, air, shelter. So we'll move on into that. But my personal question as an activist is, how do you, as a person who served in the military for years, how do you see the military-industrial complex at this stage of your life, at this point, 2011?
Well, when you say the military-industrial complex, you give people the idea that the people in uniform are like the people who are in white shirts and black suits and red ties. That's not the case. What you then see is you add the government element as a subordination to a capitalistic system which has to move money around. It doesn't matter whether it's logical or real, but if you don't like the XM1 tank, it doesn't matter, because 300,000 people in Michigan and Ohio make a living making those. So you have to be careful when you think of corporate guys as all being unfeeling. No, they're already responsible for large villages full of manufacturing people who have kids going to school and need a car and whatnot. In America, the corporations have always pretty much relied on the military for R&D money, so they don't have to build their prototypes themselves. They can get a contract with the military. The military, through the government, will pay for them. By the way, very often, the military guys don't have a lot to say about that. You get my drift. The link is between the government and the corporations more. The military are sometimes reluctant patsies, and sometimes they're just really loyal guys. They understand where the money's going. It's still going to Americans. That's what you have to know. The ones who've, been in a job for a long period of time. So, what do I think about the military-industrial complex? It's pretty much a necessary evil, as long as you believe that capitalism may not be perfect, but it's still the best solution for the world at the moment. Communism, it's interesting, is making a little bit of a comeback,
Well, speaking about communism, one of the first things in the Communist Manifesto is a private centralized banking system. And that's pretty much the architecture, that's the framework for communism. It's one of the first things in the Communist Manifesto. For 50 years we fought the Cold War, saying that we needed to rid the world of this danger of the communists taking over the world. But at the same time, here in America, we have the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank. So how do we fight communism but have the number one thing in the Communist Manifesto that we're using that controls the issuancy of credit, inflation, and pretty much controls the economy, pretty much?
Well, the communists said that in order to get to a place where everybody would be free and democratic, they would have to have the dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, that's no different than capitalism, and the same with the bank thing. Now, Fidel Castro is the only communist leader who has passed the 50-year mark of trying out the experiment called the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the Cubans were hardly free during this time. But guess what he just did about 7 months ago? He said, okay, we're out of money. So basically that's getting rid of the dictatorship of the proletariat and handing it over to the people of the land and seeing whether they've evened the playing field or not. Now, only the Cuban people are going to have to perform now to prove that idea. But I'm interested in whether it's going to work. Because capitalism is a great starter idea, but it leaves pretty much of a mess at some point. And as an artist, I'm really sorry to see my artist friends not make as much as my doctor friends, but they do in Cuba. And so, just like in a family, especially an intentional family, you have to roll with the time. And the problem is with the governments is they don't roll so well. So my message is to decentralize, to move into bioregions. Any government that wants to remain as a government moves in the bioregional support role, not a national role. We don't need nations anymore. They're just making trouble for everybody. They're artificial boundaries. They're not real boundaries. So I'm ready to change the game.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it sounds like you're talking about a one-world government.
No, the web is the government. The web is already doing the job of democracy 10 times better than it could have ever been done because it actually connected all the people involved. And it explains to them what the news is and where the resources are. That's a democracy. Nobody ever expected the web to do that, but guess what? It's doing that, and it's also all over the world. We don't have national boundaries on the web.
Well, there is the internet censorship bills and a host of other
they're
bills
trying,
that,
believe me.
that they're trying
those
to
old
regulate.
powers are trying to hold on to their, their turf. Yeah.
So do you support Ron Paul's bill to audit the Federal Reserve that's never been audited in 98 years?
Why not? Yeah. Last time I think the president asked Wall Street for a report on something, they didn't even answer his mail. Hello.
One more question. One more question, because this is We Are Change TV. We are truth activists, and after this question, we'll move on and talk about the solutions.
All right.
How do you feel about 9/11, and do you believe there was government complicity in the attacks of September 11, 2001?
They've done it every time before. End of story. Who would be interested in helping them? Israel. So happened all the people that worked in the trade buildings that were Israeli weren't in the building that day. So it's not just our government. It may be an alliance that could. And look what it did. It gave them the set of lies they needed to pump the economy with fake money again. And by the way, here's the interesting part. It worked.
Yeah.
Capitalism says you can believe in a vision, and if the vision is good enough, you can make money, print money, to make it happen. Well, that part's good, but it's hard for it to last. At some point, you have to get back to your roots and make sure everybody knows where their water is, where the oil is, where the roads are, all of that. But to give capitalism a nickel's worth of its due, it is a vision-driven source of wealth.
Do you think that it's important for the public, especially America, to realize that false flag operations are used for social manipulation, and maybe knowing for people to know that 9/11 was an inside job, even if it happened 10 years ago, maybe it'll prevent us from blindly submitting to more wars next time something just happens,
Well, the fact that it happened is going to help us not blindly submit to more wars. The fact that Wall Street fell on their butts is going to help us. The fact that the government fell on its ass in Katrina. We are paying for a service that isn't doing anything.
Right.
So why do we have it? The county of Hawaii, nicest guy you ever want to know for a mayor, has a tight-knit explanation of how willing he is to work. But guess what? Every time they come up to bat, they don't have any money to do anything we need to have done unless it's some micro event. Why do we need them? How are they really helping?
Right.
And if a real disaster came and extra water was required from someplace else, extra power was required, extra food was required from someplace else, physical means to help people, hospitals, it's not there.
Yeah.
And of course, they're not going to announce that exactly, but So we have to do all that.
Right. Yeah.
Period.
Don't count on your government for
No,
for supplies and goods when everything is going to hell. You could see it in Katrina. You could see it anywhere. You know, the Constitution was even suspended. People couldn't have guns. Wealthy people in their house couldn't protect their homes because the Constitution is suspended. So, anyways, that's enough of the problem. Thank you for that, by the way.